Hi guys, welcome to Simply Scuba. So for 2019, we're going to be taking a look at our best regulators, but I will warn you now, I have the hiccups and Shaun's getting very impatient, so we're just going to crack on, unfortunately, so I apologize at the beginning. So we've picked out some of our favorite regulators. Some are specialized for a certain thing like traveling, others are a bit more sort of all-rounder. So in no particular order, let's take a look at 5 of our favorite regulators for 2019. Okay, so first up we have the Cressi Master with the T10 first stage. So this is a very smart little regulator. The second stage itself, the Master, it's very lightweight, which means it's a little bit easier to travel with it. But the main benefit of a lightweight second stage is that you don't get jaw fatigue quite as much. So if you have a big heavy second stage that's just going to pull down, you're going to have to bite down a little bit harder, but with this one you don't have to bite down quite as much, so you don't get that jaw fatigue on longer dives. Clever little things on the inside, like the diaphragm is oval shaped. You can actually sort of open this up a little bit easier than a lot of other second stages if you know what you're doing, so you can get on the inside. It's got all the bells and whistles that you might need, a pre-dive, a venturi switch and adjustable breathing efforts. It's great in cold water and warm water. So this is your good sort of all-rounder. You've got a tough sort of rubber hose in the middle, and I quite like the aesthetics of it. I think it's quite a smart looking regulator. Moving on, we were talking about sort of lightweight. So then we go on to the Aqualung Micron regulator. So this is a traditional regulator just scaled down, so it's much smaller and much lighter. So the first stage itself is tiny. So almost the biggest section of this is the dust cap that covers over the din section. Very lightweight first stage. So this is only really for warmer waters above 10 degrees Celsius, which 10 degrees is quite cold. But if you're a traveling diver, you only travel abroad, you're only flying off to the Red Sea, this is a great little regulator to look at. A few little things which are quite smart. On the inside, you probably can't see it on this, but on the inside of the inlet, there's actually a little valve that closes itself. So that means that even when you depressurize it, it's actually protecting it from sort of water and dust ingress. So that's a smart little feature. Braided hoses are much more flexible and much lighter than traditional rubber hoses. And then the second stage itself, very small, nice and compact. Again, you don't get that same sort of jaw fatigue, but again, great for travel. You do have one adjustment on this, and this is the adjustable breathing effort knob on the side, so you can kind of dial that in to make it a little bit stiffer, or unscrew it to make it a bit lighter. Comes as well with sort of Apeks Aqualung's Comfo mouthpiece, which has this little bridge over the top, which I definitely like. I find it holds in the mouth without having to bite down on it, again helping with jaw fatigue, and you have a reusable cable tie on that. So if you ever need to swap out that mouthpiece, you don't have to sort of carry spare cable ties every time. Going to the polar opposite, we then go to Apeks with the MTX-R regulator. So the MTX-R regulator is basically the XTX range, but on steroids. So they've beefed up the second stage. So this has a metal section on the front cover. It's all sort of crenellated and sort of really tough. They've taken away a few features. They've taken away the pre-dive venturi switch and the breathable adjustment, but they've added massive heatsink fins and a few other sort of bits and bobs. But it's a very tough regulator, great for cold water. This comes from the military sort of range, the MTX. Or the MTX, which is sort of black in color. The recreational version, the MTX-R, is white in coloration. Similar features like the Comfo mouthpiece, but on this one you can sort of change these exhaust tees, so you can get the compact version as well as this sort of extended one. So depending on whether you want a more compact second stage or sort of one that sends bubbles a little bit further back. Moving down, again, braided hose, so a bit lighter and more flexible. And then we get to the first stage. So the first stage, as you can see, all these heat sink fins all over it, they're just improving the cold water performance. We've got tough rubber on the top and the bottom, so that's protecting the first stage from the usual bumps and scrapes that they tend to get, but environmentally sealed as well. So this is preventing water and contaminants from getting inside of the first stage. Again, improving cold water performance, and it just means you don't have to wash it out quite as thoroughly. High pressure ports are angled downwards away from your low pressure ports. So that means if you're sort of diving on like a twin set or side mount, it just means that the hoses route down a little bit more naturally. They also route away from the low pressure ports, so if you have a transmitter, they're less likely to bunch up and get in the way. One of the best features on the first stage is that you have a swiveling turret. So these make a world of difference for your hose routing, so that your hose can sort of come in at whatever angle, and even when you're on the dive, if you kind of turn your head to look at something, it will turn with you, so you're not going to get the same kind of tension on that hose. It's a very smart first stage, and if you're going cold water diving, this is definitely a regulator I'd be looking at. Okay, moving over to Scubapro. So Scubapro brought out the A700 a few years ago, and then with this one they brought out the A700 Carbon Black Tech. So very similar, except on the front cover, instead of sort of chrome-plated brass, this is carbon fiber. So very, very smart. It's got beautiful aesthetics. And everything about this, all of the metal has a sort of black PVD coating, which just makes it look smart and sort of improves the toughness of the metal itself. Everything that you want in a second stage, so you've got a metal body, which makes it very strong. Also acts as a massive heat sink as well. Having a metal second stage as well also helps with if you get a dry mouth whilst you're diving, because when you exhale, the moisture from your breath is going to condense on the inside of that second stage. So when you breathe in, it's a little bit more humid, so it's a bit more natural. You don't get quite a dry mouth. Venturi and sort of adjustable breathing effort in that, and you do also get a reusable cable tie on that. We're starting to see that more and more on new regulators, a reusable cable tie, so you don't have to buy a whole bunch and keep them in your bag. Mark 25 first stage, as you can see, to match the style, also has this black PVD coating, gives it a very smart aesthetic. This one, whilst it isn't environmentally sealed in a traditional sense, it does have these sort of Evo X-TIS sort of improvements, and on the inside you might be able to see it through all these little holes. All the sort of working parts that are sort of exposed to the water have a blue coating, and the blue coating is a little bit like Teflon, and ice is less likely to form on top of it, and contaminants are less likely to stick to it, so that improves the cold water performance, but by allowing water to get in, it does mean that it's still sort of balanced, so you still get sort of plenty of air even as you go down. Again, you have swiveling turret, so that sort of helps with your hose routing. You have a 5th low pressure port that comes straight out the top, so that's particularly useful on sort of side mount and twin set sort of setups, or if you dive on a long hose single cylinder primary setup. 2 high pressure ports as standard. So aesthetically, it's very smart regulator with the blacks. Everything sort of about it is very, very smart. I definitely like the Scubapro A700 because of its sort of breathing effort as well. Is very, very efficient. Okay, moving on to the Atomic ST1. So the ST1 has a very similar setup to the A700, but it's got a few little tweaks on it. So if we look at the second stage first, second stage has a Venturi system and a adjustable breathing effort, but the Venturi switch, it's not a on or off, it's automatic, so it does it all for you. Instead of a switch that's either on or off that you change during the dive, the vane on the inside is on a sort of soft bit of silicone, which changes the angle of the vane depending on the airflow. So if a free flow is about to sort of form, It changes the direction of the vane, redirects the airflow, and prevents a free flow from happening. So very, very smart. You don't have to do anything. It just kind of sits there and does it itself. Orthodontic mouthpiece on that, so you have a harder section on the bite section of the mouthpiece, so it lasts a lot longer, and then softer section for the rest of it, so it's still comfortable in your mouth. Connecting the two, you have a swivel ball joint as standard, so instead of the hose coming in at a fixed 180-degree angle, it can sort of come out at a slightly different angle, and that's very smooth, very sort of easy, and that moves during the dive as well. So as you turn and move, the hose can sort of readjust itself, and you're not going to have to bite down on the mouthpiece quite as hard, because the hose just kind of sits exactly where you want it to with minimal effort. Rubber hose connecting the two. Rubber's really tough and doesn't float up. And then coming into the first stage, you can see quite clearly that you have a 5th port coming out of the top of this first stage. And that just means you have really nice airflow in this one for your primary. So airflow will come into the first stage and then go straight out into that hose. So when you're breathing from it, very, very smooth, minimal air turbulence, so very, very effective and nice breathe. The rest of the low pressure ports are on a swiveling turret. So again, your BCD hose and all your other low pressure hoses, they're going to sort of turn and move depending on how you want them, which makes it much easier to route your hoses, especially twin set and side mount configurations. The first stage itself is environmentally sealed. So underneath here, you have a few little holes that get onto the inside of the first stage. But if you actually sort of pinch that and look underneath that, you'll see it's filled with a white grease, a bit like Krytox, and that just means that water cannot get in, but it still sort of takes that ambient pressure from the surrounding water, so it still balances that first stage, so you still get the same amount of gas no matter how deep you go. 2 high pressure ports as well, just as standard. They're nicely set far away from the low pressure ports, so that you're not going to get any sort of any problems with your configurations if you've got a really chunky wireless air transmitter, for example. Now, it was a toss-up between this one and the T3. The T3 is the titanium version of that. Titanium is great for lightweight traveling, so titanium is much lighter than sort of steel and brass, so they're much lighter to travel with, but they're not so good in cold water. So the ST1 was chosen because it's got a better cold water performance, and also titanium doesn't deal with very high percentages of oxygen very well. You can only really go up to 40%, whereas these ones, they can be oxygen cleaned if you're diving on sort of higher mixes. Okay, so there were 5 of our favorite regulators. These are all available on our website, simplyscuba.com, but let us know what your favorite regulator is and why in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and safe diving. We are an online dive store serving the UK and the world for all your diving equipment needs. So why not visit us at simplyscuba.com or click the box on your screen.